The morning sun had just begun to warm the quiet suburban streets of Willow Creek Estates, a neighborhood known for its neatly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and strict HOA regulations that governed everything from lawn height to mailbox paint color. It was the kind of place where silence wasn't just common, it was expected. A sleek black car rolled through the entrance gate, its engine humming softly as it moved past rows of pristine homes. Inside, a young tech entrepreneur sat behind the wheel. He looked confident, slightly tired, and completely absorbed in his own world. His phone kept buzzing on the passenger seat, emails, messages, reminders, each one pulling his attention away from the road and deeper into the fast-paced life he was trying to balance. He was in town for a meeting. A potential client had invited him to discuss a new software partnership, something that could expand his already growing startup. Everything in his life right now revolved around speed, fast decisions, fast profits, fast growth. That mindset followed him everywhere, even into situations that required patience and awareness. As he turned onto the client street, he slowed slightly, scanning house numbers while half listening to a voice note playing through his car speakers. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Large homes sat behind carefully maintained fences, and most driveways were empty at this hour. It gave him a sense of convenience, plenty of space, no rush, no trouble. That's when he saw it. A wide, clean driveway in front of a two-story brick house. No car parked inside, no visible signs of activity. The garage door was closed. To him, it looked completely unused. Without overthinking, he made a decision. Perfect, he muttered under his breath, already angling the car toward the driveway. He pulled in smoothly, tires rolling over the concrete with a soft crunch. The engine shut off, and for a moment there was silence. He checked his phone again, already mentally stepping into the meeting ahead. The parking decision barely registered in his mind. It was temporary, just a quick stop, no big deal. He stepped out of the car, adjusted his jacket, and glanced at the house. It had a solid, structured look, nothing flashy, but well kept. A small American flag stood near the porch, gently moving in the morning breeze. He didn't think much of it. Inside that house, however, things were not as quiet as they appeared. Unknown to him, the home belonged to a retired Marine named Daniel Harper, a man who had spent over 2 decades serving overseas, living by discipline, structure, and respect for boundaries. After returning home, Daniel had chosen this neighborhood for its orderliness, its predictability, and its sense of control, things he valued deeply after years in unpredictable environments. Daniel was not home at the moment. He had left early for a routine appointment, his driveway intentionally empty. But in a place like Willow Creek Estates, empty didn't mean unclaimed. Every resident understood that private property was taken seriously here. Especially driveways. A few houses down, a curtain shifted slightly. A woman named Linda, an active HOA committee member, had noticed the unfamiliar car the moment it pulled in. She was the type of person who rarely missed anything unusual in the neighborhood. In her eyes, the HOA wasn't just a set of rules, it was a responsibility she took personally. And right now, she had already formed her conclusion. That car doesn't belong there, she said sharply to herself, stepping away from the window. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and opened the HOA group chat. Her fingers moved quickly. Unauthorized vehicle in Mr. Harper's driveway, she typed. Possibly a contractor or trespasser. Someone needs to handle this immediately. Within seconds, responses began coming in. Some neighbors reacted with curiosity, others with concern, but Linda wasn't satisfied with just reporting it. She believed in action. She stepped outside her home, scanning the street like a self-appointed inspector. Her eyes locked onto the black car again, now parked neatly as if it belonged there. That only made her more irritated. This is exactly how problems start, she muttered. Meanwhile, inside the house, the tech entrepreneur was still completely unaware of the brewing tension outside. He checked his watch, then his phone again. The meeting was approaching. He had no idea that his simple parking decision had already been turned into a neighborhood incident. And somewhere on the same street, the owner of the driveway was already on his way back. The system of order in Willow Creek Estates was about to be tested, and no one involved yet realized just how quickly things were going to escalate. The afternoon in Willow Creek Estates remained calm on the surface, but underneath that quiet exterior, something was already shifting. The black car still sat in the same driveway, polished and still, as if it had always belonged there. From a distance, it looked harmless, just another vehicle parked in a suburban neighborhood. But to Linda, the HOA committee member, it was a growing irritation she couldn't ignore. She stood on her porch for a moment, arms crossed, eyes locked on the vehicle. Her mind was already building a story around it. A contractor ignoring rules, a visitor being careless, or worse, someone deliberately disrespecting property boundaries. In neighborhoods like this, perception often became reality before facts ever had a chance to appear. Without waiting any longer, Linda walked briskly across the sidewalk toward the neighboring house. Her pace was sharp, purposeful, almost as if she were on official duty. She didn't knock immediately. Instead, she scanned the property again as if expecting some additional clue to justify her concern. Then she knocked. The sound echoed through the quiet morning air. Inside the house, the tech entrepreneur was mid-conversation. He had arrived at the client's home just minutes earlier and was now discussing terms for a potential partnership. The homeowner, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, was leading him through the living room toward a small home office. The knock interrupted them both. The homeowner paused. "Were you expecting anyone?" The tech bro shook his head slightly. "No, I thought it was just you and me today." Another knock followed, louder this time. The homeowner sighed softly and headed toward the door. When he opened it, Linda stood there immediately, her expression tight and controlled. "Sorry to interrupt," she said quickly, though her tone suggested she wasn't actually sorry. "There's an unauthorized vehicle parked in your driveway." The homeowner blinked. "My driveway?" "Yes," Linda said firmly, already pointing past him without being invited in. "A black sedan. It doesn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. This is against HOA regulations. We need to address it immediately." The homeowner glanced past her, slightly confused. "I have a guest inside. Maybe that's their car." Linda didn't soften. "Then they should be informed they cannot park there. Rules apply to everyone." At that moment, the tech entrepreneur stepped closer, hearing his vehicle being discussed. He walked toward the door, curious and slightly amused by the intensity of the situation. "Hey," he said calmly, "that's my car. I'm here for a meeting." Linda turned toward him immediately, as if she had been waiting for that answer. "And you parked in a private driveway without permission?" she asked, her voice sharpening. The tech bro hesitated. I thought it was fine. The garage was closed, no cars were there. I'm just here for a short meeting." "That is not how property works here," Linda replied quickly. "You can't just assume empty means available." The homeowner raised a hand slightly. "Okay, let's all calm down for a second." But Linda wasn't done. Her focus had already locked onto the situation like it was a violation she needed to correct in real time. "I'm going to report this to the HOA board," she said, pulling out her phone. "This is exactly why we have rules. People start assuming and then it turns into chaos." The tech entrepreneur frowned slightly. "Look, I didn't mean any disrespect. It was a simple misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding is still a violation," Linda replied, already typing on her phone. Her fingers moved fast, adding details to her complaint. She even took a photo of the driveway from where she stood, making sure the evidence was documented. In her mind, she wasn't being extreme, she was maintaining order. The homeowner finally stepped between them, trying to defuse the situation. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but this is my guest. He's here for business. We'll handle it." But Linda's attention didn't fully shift. Her eyes kept drifting back to the driveway as if it personally offended her sense of order. "That car shouldn't be there," she repeated. "Even temporarily, it creates precedent." The tech bro exhaled slowly, clearly realizing this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. He checked his watch again, the meeting already stretching longer than expected. Time was slipping away, and this situation, this unexpected confrontation over a parking spot, felt absurd to him. Still, he tried to remain polite. "I'll move it if it's a problem," he said. But before anyone could respond, Linda was already stepping back. "It is a problem," she said, "and it's already been reported." She turned sharply and walked away, her mission complete in her eyes. The homeowner watched her go, then looked back at the tech entrepreneur with a tired expression. "You picked an interesting neighborhood for a meeting," he said quietly. The tech bro gave a faint, uneasy smile, unaware that this small parking mistake had already set off a chain reaction he hadn't even begun to understand. And somewhere down the street, another figure was already heading back toward the neighborhood, someone who wouldn't see this situation as a misunderstanding at all. The afternoon light over Willow Creek Estates had begun to shift, stretching longer shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and silent sidewalks. The neighborhood still looked calm, but beneath that calm, the tension from earlier had not disappeared. It had only settled in, waiting for the next moment to rise again. The black sedan remained parked in the same driveway, unmoved, unchanged, almost as if it had been placed there permanently. To anyone passing by, it might have seemed like a minor detail, but in this neighborhood, details mattered. And now, the actual owner of that driveway was returning. Daniel Harper drove through the entrance gate without hurry, his posture steady, his attention sharp even after a routine morning appointment. Years of military discipline had a way of staying with a person long after service ended. He noticed everything: the positioning of cars, the subtle shifts in neighborhood energy, even the way people moved on sidewalks. As he turned onto his street, something immediately felt off. Not wrong exactly, but out of place. His eyes narrowed slightly as he approached his house. From a distance, he saw it, a vehicle sitting in his driveway. He didn't speed up, he didn't react outwardly, but his mind had already begun processing the situation with calm precision. Unfamiliar car, no prior notice, no contractor scheduled, no visitor expected. He slowed the vehicle to a stop in front of his home. For a moment, he simply observed. The black sedan was positioned neatly, as if the driver believed they belonged there. The windows were tinted, reflecting sunlight. No movement inside, no indication of urgency or awareness. Daniel's hand rested lightly on the steering wheel. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was assessing. A part of him, the part shaped by years of structure and responsibility, already understood what this likely was: a mistake, a misunderstanding, or someone ignoring boundaries. He stepped out of his vehicle slowly, closing the door with controlled ease. The sound was soft but final in a way that carried weight. As he walked toward his house, his presence changed the atmosphere around him, not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet, grounded way, the kind of presence that made people instinctively pay attention without knowing why. A neighbor across the street noticed him first and quickly looked away. Daniel's eyes moved between the driveway and the house. No signs of forced entry, no visible damage. That was good. But the car still didn't belong. At the same time, just inside the house, the tech entrepreneur was wrapping up his meeting. The conversation had become awkward after the earlier interruption, but he was trying to push through professionally. He had no idea that the situation outside had escalated further. His phone buzzed again. Another message in the HOA group chat had appeared, but he didn't check it. Time was his priority. Efficiency, closure, next task. Meanwhile, Linda had already expanded the situation beyond a simple complaint. She had moved from observation to escalation, speaking to another HOA member nearby, insisting that enforcement might be required if the trespasser did not comply. In her mind, she was protecting order. But none of them had yet realized that the owner of the driveway had returned. Daniel stopped a few steps from the front of his house. He looked again at the vehicle. Then he noticed movement inside the house. Voices, one unfamiliar, one familiar. His gaze sharpened slightly. Without rushing, he walked up the driveway. Each step was steady, deliberate, measured. Inside, the tech bro finally finished his conversation and stepped toward the entryway, adjusting his jacket as he prepared to leave. The homeowner walked beside him, still trying to smooth over the earlier tension. "I'll walk you out," the homeowner said. They opened the front door together. And that was the moment everything aligned. The tech entrepreneur stepped outside first, mid-sentence about follow-up emails and timelines. The homeowner followed, and both of them stopped, because standing at the edge of the driveway was Daniel Harper. Still calm, observing. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just present. The tech bro's eyes followed Daniel's line of sight, and then he saw it. The black sedan. Then he saw Daniel again. Something about the way Daniel stood made the air feel different, not threatening, but grounded, like someone who didn't need to raise their voice to be understood. The homeowner immediately straightened slightly. "Daniel," he said carefully, "there's been a bit of confusion." But Daniel didn't respond right away. His attention stayed on the vehicle. Then finally he spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, low enough that it didn't carry far, but strong enough that it didn't need to. "That car," he said simply, "is in my driveway." No emotion added, no exaggeration, just fact. The tech bro opened his mouth slightly, realizing this was not just a neighbor issue anymore. And somewhere down the street, Linda was still approaching, still preparing to handle the situation, completely unaware that the person she had been reporting had just arrived home. The moment Daniel Harper's words settled into the air, simple, calm, undeniable, the atmosphere around the driveway changed. "That car is in my driveway." No raised voice, no anger, no accusation. Just ownership stated like a fact carved into stone. For a brief second, nobody spoke. The tech entrepreneur shifted his weight slightly, suddenly aware that the situation had moved far beyond a minor parking misunderstanding. The homeowner beside him looked caught between relief and concern, as if he knew this moment was inevitable but had hoped it wouldn't arrive quite like this. Daniel stood still, eyes steady on the black sedan. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it carried something heavier, certainty, the kind of certainty that didn't need validation from anyone else. Inside the tech bro's mind, the earlier confidence he carried into the neighborhood began to fracture. He had walked into this day thinking in terms of efficiency and convenience. Meetings, deals, schedules, parking had been an afterthought, something temporary, irrelevant. Now it felt like the center of everything. He cleared his throat slightly. "Look, I didn't realize it was private. The garage was closed and—" He stopped when Daniel finally looked at him. Not sharply, not judgmentally. Just directly. "I understand," Daniel said evenly. That made it worse in a way neither of them expected. There was no anger to argue against, no emotion to redirect, only calm acknowledgement. The homeowner quickly stepped in again, raising a hand in a calming gesture. "It's an honest mistake. He's here for a business meeting with me. He thought the driveway was available." Before Daniel could respond, a voice cut in from the sidewalk. "I knew this would happen." Linda arrived like a storm that had finally reached its destination. She walked up the driveway with purpose, phone still in her hand, eyes locked on the scene like she was stepping into a situation she had already judged and documented. Behind her, a couple of neighbors had started to gather at a distance, drawn by the tension. "I reported this 20 minutes ago," she said quickly, pointing at the sedan. "Unauthorized vehicle, HOA violation, and now look, this is exactly what I said would happen when people ignore rules." Her gaze shifted to Daniel. "And you must be the owner," she added, almost satisfied. "This can be handled properly through the HOA if you cooperate. We already have documentation." The tech entrepreneur exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "This is getting out of hand. I already said I'll move the car." But Linda didn't look at him. She was focused on Daniel now, as if he represented the final authority she needed to confront. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at her for a moment, just observing, not reacting, not judging, simply processing the situation as it stood. Then he spoke. "Did you confirm ownership before reporting it?" The question wasn't sharp, but it landed cleanly. Linda hesitated for half a second. It was parked in a driveway that didn't have a visible car. That's enough to assume. "Assume," Daniel repeated quietly. That single word shifted the tone again. The homeowner stepped forward, trying to diffuse the rising tension. Linda, this is my guest. There was a misunderstanding. We don't need to escalate this further. But Linda was already locked in. This is exactly why the HOA exists, she said firmly. People don't follow structure unless it's enforced. First it's parking, then it's bigger issues. I'm not going to ignore it. The tech bro looked between them, clearly realizing he had become the center of a neighborhood conflict he never intended to enter. He raised both hands slightly. Okay, everyone, seriously. I'll just move the car right now and… You don't need to rush, Daniel interrupted calmly. That stopped him. Daniel finally turned his attention fully to the tech entrepreneur. His tone remained steady. But understand this, he continued. This is not a shared space. It is private property. Mistakes happen, but boundaries matter here. There was no hostility in the statement, only clarity. The tech bro nodded quickly, understood my mistake. But Linda wasn't satisfied. She stepped closer, her voice sharpening again. So you're just going to ignore the violation, no formal acknowledgement, no HOA report closure? That's not how this works. A few neighbors murmured behind her, unsure whether to support her or step back. Daniel's gaze shifted briefly to Linda again. Still calm. Still controlled. Nothing is being ignored, he said. It is being resolved. That should have ended it. But Linda's frustration had already built too far. She lifted her phone again. I'm escalating this to the board. This needs to be formally addressed. The tech entrepreneur let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh of disbelief, but stopped himself. The absurdity of the situation was becoming clearer by the second. A parking mistake had turned into a procedural conflict involving reports, assumptions, and authority claims. Daniel finally moved, not toward anger but toward resolution. He walked a few steps closer to the sedan and placed his hand lightly on the roof, as if grounding the situation back into something physical, something simple. Then he looked at everyone. This ends here, he said quietly. No one argued immediately, because something in his tone made it clear it already had. But the real question now wasn't about the car anymore. It was about how far the situation had already escalated, and whether everyone involved was ready to accept the consequences of their assumptions. The driveway fell into a tense silence after Daniel's final words. This ends here. It wasn't a command shouted across the neighborhood. It wasn't a threat. It was something far more unsettling, finality delivered with calm certainty. For a moment, even Linda stopped speaking, her phone still raised but forgotten in her hand. The tech entrepreneur stood slightly off to the side, feeling like a guest in a conversation that had stopped being about him but still revolved entirely around his mistake. The homeowner looked uneasy, caught between his guest, his neighbor, and the HOA member who clearly wasn't backing down. Linda was the first to break the silence again. It doesn't end here, she said sharply. Not until proper procedure is followed. This is HOA jurisdiction, and I will not have rules ignored because someone, she gestured vaguely toward the tech bro, didn't think ahead. Daniel didn't react immediately. Instead, he looked at her for a long second, as if deciding whether this needed correction or explanation. Then he turned slightly toward the house. I'll be right back, he said simply. No one stopped him, no one really could. He walked inside with the same steady pace he had carried since arriving, controlled, deliberate, unbothered by the noise outside. The front door closed behind him, leaving the group in an uneasy standstill. Linda took the moment as proof she was right. See, she said quickly, turning to the homeowner, he's avoiding accountability. This is exactly why documentation matters. People think they can just… The homeowner sighed, rubbing his forehead. Linda, please, just give it a second. But she was already typing again, her frustration now fully channeled into her phone. The tech entrepreneur shifted his weight, glancing at his car, then back at the house. The situation felt like it had detached from reality and become something procedural, almost bureaucratic, like a conflict feeding on itself. Inside the house, Daniel moved with purpose. He didn't rush, he didn't hesitate. He walked straight down a short hallway and opened a small cabinet near the entrance. Inside was a simple folder, neat, organized, clearly maintained. He pulled it out, checked it briefly, then closed the cabinet again. For him, this wasn't about proving anything. It was about ending confusion. He returned outside, holding the folder in one hand. The moment the front door opened again, the attention outside shifted instantly. Even neighbors who had been watching from a distance leaned slightly forward, sensing that something definitive was about to happen. Daniel stepped back onto the driveway. The wind moved lightly across the street, rustling leaves, but no one spoke. He walked directly toward the group and stopped in front of them. Without a word, he opened the folder. Inside were official property documents, clean pages, printed records, clear identification of ownership and boundaries. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He simply held them out so they could be seen. "This property," Daniel said calmly, "is registered under my name." He pointed once briefly to the driveway section on the document. "This includes the driveway." The tech entrepreneur leaned slightly forward, looking closely now. The reality of it settled in quickly, too clearly to misunderstand. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. The land he had parked on wasn't shared, wasn't communal, wasn't negotiable. It was private. Linda, however, reacted differently. "This doesn't change HOA enforcement authority," she said immediately, trying to regain control of the situation. "Even private property within the community is subject to regulation if it impacts order." Daniel looked at her again. Not sharply, but directly enough that her words slowed. "Order," he repeated quietly. Then he closed the folder. "You escalated a misunderstanding into a violation before confirming facts," he said. "That is not order, that is assumption." The words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made Linda pause. For the first time, her confidence flickered. The homeowner finally stepped in, more firmly now. "Linda, enough, this is resolved. The car will be moved. There's no violation here." The tech entrepreneur exhaled and nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'll move it right now. I'm sorry again, I genuinely didn't know." He walked toward the sedan, eager now to end the situation completely. The energy around him had shifted from confusion to urgency. He just wanted distance from the conflict he had unintentionally triggered. But Linda wasn't finished emotionally, even if she was running out of ground to stand on. She lowered her phone slightly, looking between Daniel and the homeowner. "So that's it?" she asked, still tense. "No acknowledgement of the disruption, no formal HOA note, we just ignore it." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He simply watched as the tech entrepreneur got into his car, started the engine, and carefully backed out of the driveway. The tires rolled over the concrete that had caused all of this. Only when the car fully cleared the property did Daniel speak again. "It was never about ignoring anything," he said quietly. "It was about correcting it without escalation." The tech bro gave a small nod through the window before driving off down the street, visibly relieved. Silence returned. But this time, it wasn't tense in the same way. It was heavier in a different sense, like something had been concluded, but not everyone had emotionally caught up yet. Linda stood there, still processing. The HOA authority she relied on hadn't been challenged aggressively, but it had been quietly dismantled by facts. And Daniel Harper, without raising his voice once, had made one thing clear. Order didn't come from assumptions. It came from understanding what was actually real. The black sedan disappeared down Willow Creek Estate's main road, leaving behind a quiet that felt noticeably different from the silence before it arrived. The driveway, now empty again, looked almost untouched, as if the entire confrontation had been a brief distortion in an otherwise orderly neighborhood. But for the people still standing there, nothing felt normal. The tech entrepreneur was the first to fully exit the situation, both physically and mentally. As he drove away, he replayed the sequence in his mind. a simple parking decision, an unexpected confrontation, escalating accusations, and finally a calm authority that ended everything without raising a voice. It wasn't embarrassment that stayed with him most, it was clarity. He realized how easily assumptions had shaped the entire chain of events. What he thought was an empty driveway was private property. What the HOA member thought was a violation was a misunderstanding. And what he thought would be a quick meeting had turned into a lesson in awareness he hadn't expected. As his car turned onto the main road, he let out a long breath. "I should have just asked," he muttered to himself. Back at the house, the atmosphere slowly settled, but not evenly. Daniel Harper stood where he had been since the beginning, calm, still, composed. He closed the folder of documents and held it loosely at his side. For him, the situation was already resolved. There was no lingering frustration, no desire to continue it further. Problems, once corrected, did not require emotional residue. That was something he had learned long before Willow Creek Estates. The homeowner exhaled deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Daniel, I'm sorry about all this. I didn't think it would turn into that." Daniel gave a slight nod. "It's fine," he said simply. And he meant it. He wasn't interested in assigning blame beyond what was necessary. Mistakes had happened, boundaries had been crossed and then corrected. That was the end of it in his mind. But Linda stood a few feet away, still visibly unsettled. Her phone was now lowered completely. No more typing, no more reports. The energy she had carried earlier, the certainty, the urgency, the belief that she was enforcing order had started to collapse under the weight of what she had just witnessed. For the first time, she looked less like someone in control and more like someone reconsidering how she defined control. "This neighborhood has rules for a reason," she said finally, though her voice lacked the earlier sharpness. "People rely on consistency. If we start letting things slide—" "No one is letting anything slide," Daniel interrupted gently. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't dismissive. It was precise. "That situation was not a violation," he continued. "It was an assumption, and assumptions create conflict faster than actual problems do." The words lingered in the air longer than expected. A few neighbors who had gathered at a distance began to slowly disperse, sensing that the moment of spectacle had passed. The tension that had drawn them in was no longer unfolding, it had already resolved. Linda looked down briefly, processing. For someone who built her sense of purpose around enforcement and order, the idea that she had escalated a situation based on incomplete understanding was difficult to absorb. "I was trying to protect the neighborhood," she said more quietly now. Daniel nodded once. "I understand," he replied, "but protection requires verification." That was all he said. No lecture, no judgment, just a simple truth delivered without friction. A long pause followed. The wind moved lightly across the street again, and this time it felt normal, just air moving through trees, not tension passing through people. The homeowner finally broke the silence. "Well," he said with a tired half-smile, "I think today officially counts as the most interesting parking situation we've ever had here." It earned a faint, reluctant smile from the tech bro's perspective, though he wasn't there anymore to hear it. Even Linda let out a small, uneasy breath, the kind that came after realizing a situation was already over before she fully processed it. Daniel adjusted his stance slightly. "I'll leave it there," he said, referring to the matter as a whole. "Just make sure future concerns are confirmed before escalation." It wasn't directed at anyone specifically, it was general, final, practical. Then, without waiting for further response, he turned toward his house. As he walked up the steps, the energy of the entire incident seemed to drain away behind him. The door closed with the same quiet control it had opened with earlier. No drama. No aftermath. Just closure. Outside, Linda remained standing for a few more seconds, staring at the empty driveway. Something about the simplicity of how everything had ended stayed with her more than the confrontation itself. There had been no shouting. No argument she could win. No authority struggle that escalated into chaos. Just a misunderstanding corrected by facts, and a man who never once raised his voice to establish control. Finally, she turned and walked back toward her home, slower than before. Across the neighborhood, life resumed its usual rhythm. Lawns were watered, doors closed, distant conversations faded back into normalcy. Willow Creek Estates returned to its predictable quiet. But something subtle had changed. For Daniel Harper, it was just another day where order was restored. For the tech entrepreneur, it was a reminder that assumptions can be expensive. And for Linda, it was the beginning of a quiet realization that enforcing rules without understanding context doesn't always create order, it sometimes creates conflict instead.